Hey, welcome back to the channel. So, you're a rusty pilot and you want to get back into aviation. Personally, I think that's a great idea. And in this video, we're going to show you my story on how I did just that. So, stick around and I'll show you how to get it done. All right, thanks to all my regular subscribers who normally come here for video game repair, but hopefully have been enjoying some of these airplane videos because, well, personally, I've been enjoying making them and getting myself back into training. So this video is all about, we're going to call it the rusty pilot. That rusty pilot can go in many stages. There are cases where maybe you were current and flying and just got out of it for a couple years. And, you know, in that case, you're probably not too bad. You just need to find a CFI, make a few flights, have a normal biannual, and you'll be ready to go. But for some of us, it's been a few years. I know in my last video, when I was talking about finding a flight school to get back into shape, and I'll link that up here, I said I was out of date about 27 years. Well, I found my old logbook, and the last entry was 2/5 of 93. So it's closer to 29 years. So, like I was saying, it is a skill that is perishable. Just because you were a good pilot at one point doesn't mean you still are. And in my case, my brain said I should have been good still, but the reality is I wasn't. And I'm glad I went the path of finding a flight school that was able to work with me. So if you're a rusty pilot that's only been out of it for a few years, the AOPA has a program for people like you. It's their Rusty Pilots program. If you become a member, you can go through it. They'll help you get the training you need and get recertified to get back into the air, which is kind of the point of all of this. For somebody like me, I was so far out and so far gone that my brain knew what to do, but all the muscle memory and the skills to be quick in my thinking on every aspect of the flying had diminished. And, you know, you can make it akin to just like working out. You may know what to do. You may have been a track star in high school, but now you can't go up the stairs without being out of breath. And that training helps rebuild all that memory and thought flow. Now, before I keep going on, since this is normally a video game channel, I had to find myself some new t-shirts that fit the narrative, since we're splitting between aircraft and games. And I'm gonna just put a splash up here of the shirt. And as you can see, it's kind of a spoof on old gaming. For my video game people, the numbers on my right, on your left, are transponder squawk codes. Inside the aircraft, there's a small device that helps the radar know exactly who we are, and they can assign a squawk code, and then they'll know exactly where we are on their screen. These are standard codes in this case. 7500 means we've been hijacked. 7600 means I'm having radio communication problems. And 7700 means I'm having some sort of an emergency. So, as we know from our cheat codes, if you look at the other side, since I'm plugging in 7500 and I'm telling the radar people that I've been hijacked, I get to fly with F-16s. If I squawk 7600, I'm basically telling ATC to, I'm not talking to them, which we never want to do. And 7700 means I get priority landing anywhere because they think I'm having an emergency. All right, so it's game humor with airplane humor mixed in. So it seemed to be a very appropriate shirt. Okay, so now the reality of somebody who either didn't finish training or, you know, hasn't flown for years and years and years and years and years. The reality is you're not going to be a good pilot anymore, regardless of how good you were in the past. There's a lot of things to remember, a lot of skills to regain. So I guess number one point is don't be hard on yourself. You're going to go up. You're going to make mistakes. But that's why you're going to grab a CFI to be sitting right next to you to help you along and to make sure that things aren't going to go bad. All right, number two, allow yourself to relearn. I've heard so many stories now from CFIs I've been talking to that they'll get a rusty pilot, and while they might not be doing things correctly, or at least the way the CFI would want them to do, while they're being upset with themselves, they also get upset with the CFI. So remember, he's here or she's here to help you get back into the sky. So don't take your frustrations out on them because, well, they're just people too. All right, the third point is expect to need some time. I have to admit, somewhere in the back of my head, I thought, I'm going to get up, it's going to be a little bit rusty, I'm going to make a few mistakes, but I'm going to get it all back, and, you know, inside of a couple hours, I'd be ready to go again. The reality is, I wasn't. So, in my case, the first time up, it was very bumpy and windy, and it was more or less every ounce of my brain to just control the aircraft. And part of that problem is I think I was fighting the aircraft too much. Instead of just letting it do its own thing and keeping it the direction I wanted. So even on our first landing that day, I had to relinquish controls back to the CFI because I simply needed a 5-minute breather. And I wanted to watch him. I wanted to experience how he was going to handle it. And so that kind of comes back to the don't be hard on yourself. It takes time. The skill has to be relearned. Also on that point, for me, after that first flight, and I could reflect on what happened and what I was doing, and quite frankly, how bad I was upset with myself because everything he told me what I should be doing, I knew. And when I had time to reflect later that night, sitting on the couch, I thought to myself, you know, I knew how to give it crosswind correction for a landing, albeit it was a 20-knot crosswind. But, you know, I knew how to talk to the tower. I knew how to talk to ground. I knew all these things. But when thrown into the moment, I just wasn't. It was like I was a day one pilot again, to be very honest. But on my second flight, the winds were a little calmer. I could focus more on the task at hand opposed to fighting the aircraft. And a lot of the things started coming back. And it's the old saying, it's just like riding a bicycle, but a little harder to put the baseball cards between the spokes. So on that second flight up, I was able to more or less correctly do our maneuvers. We did the normal S-turns, you know, across a road, circle around a point on the ground. And, you know, it was kind of funny. While I was paying attention to something else, I heard the engine go to idle. And I simply asked him, did we lose an engine? And he said, yes, we did. And I was able to correctly perform the emergency procedures to show him that I knew how to get it back on the ground, more or less safe. Not that we landed it, but it's a normal practice procedure. Okay, the next point is your landings are going to be bad, especially if you've been out of it as long as me. All my prior training were in Cessna high-wing aircraft, although over the years, my buddies and I, we were able to run between some airports and always catch rides on interesting aircraft just walking in the hangars, although it seems like those days are gone now because of security reasons. So I decided to fly the school's Piper Warrior. So it's a totally different aircraft. It's a low wing opposed to a high wing. It has all different speeds. It has different feel. Has a full flying elevator opposed to just a standard elevator. So the feel is different. So that kind of brings me to this point where if you have trained in a certain aircraft or you have been used to flying a certain aircraft and you've been away for 10 plus years and you fly something that's kind of a different animal, don't beat yourself up on that. Stick with it and just keep going, because you're going to get it eventually. All right. The final point I want to make in all of this is that flying opens up a new world. It's, as a lot of people like to say, it becomes a time machine. On one hand, depending on your rating, weather can really mess you up on a day you want to get away. But on those nice days that you just want to, go 200 miles away, obviously in a car, that's a long trip. You're going to be running for several hours. Where in a small aircraft, you might only be looking at an hour or an hour and a half to go to that same destination. Also, there's a lot of wonderment in flying for a lot of people. I myself have been flying model aircraft since I was a little kid. I've always been fascinated with it, which is why I started flying back in the 90s. And even to this day, I still fly model aircraft. And a lot of kids, even if they don't want to fly model aircraft or do those kinds of hobbies, there's still a wonderment in flying and being with family. And on that note, I was able to share flying with my youngest daughter, and she absolutely loved it. She went up, she enjoyed it, she asked a few questions, and she had such a good time that I took her up a second time. Unfortunately, it was a boring day probably for her and even for my CFI, because I needed to nail my landings. I needed that to be better. So we ran the pattern about 8 or 9 times, a bunch of touch and goes and go around. Somewhere along the way, I asked my daughter if she was okay, and I didn't hear anything from her. And the CFI looked behind him and said, "She must be okay. She's asleep." So we were able to make a couple more landings, and we got on the ground, and she was still asleep, even after we had parked the aircraft. That in of itself has made it worth it for me to be able to share that with my daughter. Now, I do have an older daughter, and she's not quite ready to go up, and I'm not going to force her. But for anybody out there who is watching, there is a need for pilots. Unfortunately, I'm probably a little too old to get into being a professional pilot. By the time I would be ready and the money spent, it would probably be hard to recoup that by the time I'd be forced to retire anyway. But there is a need for pilots. Hopefully once the Sonics is done, which we've talked about in other videos, and I'll link it up there. Once that's done, I'll be able to do some of the Junior Eagles through the EAA and help other kids get a free flight to see how it is and maybe spark some new aviators. So that's it in a nutshell. I really appreciate you all being here and watching these videos. And the next one's going to be another game video. I've got so much on the shelf right now that I'm a little backlogged and I haven't been able to record. But we've got a bunch of different things coming up. And hopefully I'll get my videos out a little sooner. So please don't forget to hit the bell notification and hit subscribe if you are enjoying the content. And I'll see you on my next video. Thanks.